Hi, this is Warren Sprouse. I'm the host of the Bible Forum. Meets here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Tonight we're looking at Kyle Odom. We're looking at meditation. The devil made me do it. Kyle Odom, you might know, you might not know. He is from Idaho. Kyle shot a preacher last week or the week before. I don't know exactly when. Shot him 6 times in the back, got on an airplane, flew to Washington, D.C., and threw a sheaf of paper over the fence at the White House, which is being called his manifesto. And nobody was paying a whole lot of attention to Kyle until all of this started to unfold. Police said that Kyle had a history of mental illness. And he initially pleaded mental illness when first coming before the judge. But he has since changed his plea. Now he's pleading guilty. What happened? Well, a couple of weeks ago, 30-year-old they say ex-Marine, but my father was a Marine, and you never were allowed to say that. He was a former Marine. And my mother would swear that he was never ex-Marine at all. Once a Marine, always a Marine. That which does not kill you makes you strong. That's the code to live by. Anyway, Kyle laid in wait for Pastor Remington as he came out of church one Sunday afternoon, and he shot him. He says he shot him 12 times. Police report said 6. Knowing the seriousness of the crime, he wrote what officials are now calling his manifesto. As I mentioned, is what got him arrested in Washington, D.C. What was he doing? Well, Kyle came to believe that the pastor was part of a vast alien conspiracy to enslave the human race, a conspiracy he believed extended to Congress. Where did he get that idea? He got it from aliens. People from another place, another planet, or another time zone, or another whatever. He wrote, quote, "Things are not what they appear to be. The world is ruled by an ancient civilization from Mars. Pastor Tim was one of them. He was the reason my life was ruined." He said, "I shot the man 12 times. There's no way any human could have survived that event. That proves it." The newspapers say that Kyle began his journey into hell while he was in college in the spring of 2014. He was stressed. He started looking around for ways to cope, and he discovered meditation. Not biblical meditation. Biblical meditation is where you consider positive ideas from a loving God. You open the Bible and you begin to read, and you find a Bible verse or a section that seems very meaningful to you, or touches an issue you're dealing with, and you take some time, get alone quiet, and you read it. And you read it and read it and read it. And each time you read it, you emphasize a different word in that sentence or in that paragraph. You've all been exposed to that sort of thing in your lifetime. And it does exactly what you want done. It plants that information in your head, in your mind. Eastern meditation is the direct opposite. Eastern meditation is emptying your mind, shutting off your conscious mind so that your unconscious mind can run the events. And you do it with a mantra. What you are doing is hypnotizing yourself. You are placing yourself in what is called an altered state of consciousness. And when you do that, you open your mind up to another mind. You see it and understand it when you sleep and you have a nightmare. And the nightmare is what it is. It's scary. You wake up in a sweat. When you think about the nightmare and the events, usually they come from your life. But the events are all jumbled. And some of them don't even seem to be real. They might reflect a fear that you have that either you don't know about or you do know about. It might reflect an ability that you'd like to have or you don't have. It might reflect a desire. But because your mind is not engaged, your unconscious mind is what's at work. It's just dragging up everything in your head, in your mind you've ever experienced, felt, smelled, whatever, and throwing them all at you at one time. It's scary. What's more scary is that you have shut off your conscious mind and you're still awake. That's what happens in Eastern meditation, where another mind may be able to influence you. In Kyle's life, he said it all started when he was in college and the work got hard, and so he turned to Eastern meditation. And then life became more bizarre and more frightening. He said his coursework became so easy, he transferred to Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, enrolled in a PhD course in human genetics. And that course was easy, thanks to his alien awakening. So he dropped out. And that's when his life became a living hell. He said he couldn't sleep. Aliens posing as classmates tried to provoke him into becoming the next school shooter. Well, he left Texas, returned to Idaho, and this is where Kyle said things got weird. He thought people were sending him secret messages. He also saw secret messages in newspaper headlines. Someone invited him to church, but when he entered that building, he said, quote, "Something felt very wrong. I felt my life was in danger and I became so uncomfortable I had to leave." Unholy spirits are not comfortable where the Holy Spirit is at work. The pastor, Tim Remington, began sending him text messages to encourage him and to begin a relationship. And Kyle writes, quote, "At first these were innocuous Bible messages, but then he started threatening me. He sent messages talking about their power and other things. He did all of this through Bible verses so it would not look suspicious." When Remington allegedly sent Odom a text reading angels, the Marine veteran saw helicopters flying around his house, and that was when he knew he was in trouble. Can you see what's happening here? Something that's been billed as a means to relax and to clear your mind, to be energized, to be at peace, was actually a doorway to the spirit world. This is what we've been told about Eastern meditation ever since it appeared on the scene here in America, which was back in the 1960s. Transcendental meditation came along and the whole community went up in arms and said, no! They wanted to introduce it into our schools. They failed, and it went away. But in less than 10 years, it was back as a science, a mind science, and has remained in our school systems and in our society ever since. Now, Eastern meditation's been around for thousands of years. It just hasn't been here in America that long. People were starting to be encouraged to sit quietly for 15 or 20 minutes, to clear their mind, to simply repeat a mantra, 1 or 2 syllable sounds, and the result would be that their pulse would slow and their blood pressure would go down, stress levels would lower, and all sorts of wonderful things would happen. What we weren't being told at the time, but turned out later as people started looking at this is exactly what happens when anybody would just sit quietly for 15 or 20 minutes a day. You don't have to enter into an altered state of consciousness to have this happen. But that's what Eastern meditation does to us. It introduces us to another world. Now, we Americans don't know a whole lot about this kind of stuff. At least we didn't in the 1950s. But by the 1970s, we knew a lot about it. By the 1980s, it was full blown. What happened between 1950 and 1970? We sent millions of young men and women to Southeast Asia. And there things began to change. These folks came home and talked about drugs being available, marijuana, LSD. They talked about other things that were happening over there that weren't happening here. A different world. And part of that world was scary. And they came home. And there are experts, others who look at socioeconomic, spiritual kinds of things and say that going to Vietnam, our troops brought demons home with them. Most people write that off and say, yeah, well, they're just talking. Demons are real. And drugs are an entry. Because it does very much what Eastern meditation does. It shuts down your conscious mind. People started thinking that wrong was right and evil was good and all sorts of crazy stuff. Cocaine and other hard drugs made inroads into our culture. And so did Eastern religious ideas and practices. The scoffers laugh, oh yeah, but the experts weren't so sure. All this talk about demons and evil forces was the stuff of horror films. But we know better now. And here we are. Evil has invaded the culture, and goodness is now outlawed. More and more really strange and vicious crimes are being committed, with people revealing more and more weird reasoning behind them. Decency is being replaced with personal rights. Laws are favoring every sort of aberrant and destructive practice. And decency and godliness are being outlawed at every turn. Books, music, movies, TV shows are featuring bizarre and occultic themes, and they're being called entertainment. Young people are no longer innocent at 4, 5, 6, 8 years of age. They know more than you and I did in our 20s and 30s. Parents are no longer parenting, nor do they know how. I just started this week writing a book on parenting, why children are so very at risk. In large part because the family as a cultural structure no longer exists. And who benefits from any of this? Kyle thought he was dealing with extraterrestrials, when in reality, it was probably demons. Is that extreme? The Bible says the entire world of men dwells within the wicked. That Satan is the god of this world, the prince of the power of the air. Non-physical entity. Makes one wonder about all the crazy, what's that about shootings we've seen over the past 10 or 20 years. 2 preteens setting up a rifle outside a grammar school and setting off the fire alarm. Shooting their classmates as they came out. 2 teenagers in Columbine dressing in black, acting and looking weird, accumulating serious weaponry, walking into their high school and gunning down children they went to school with as they laughed. Pictures of them where their faces look weird. Connecticut school massacre, the movie theater, there's a bunch of these things. People who look and act in weird ways for seemingly no good reason. In his manifesto, Odom admitted to plotting to shoot Pastor Remington. He also claimed that the pastor was part of a vast alien conspiracy to enslave the human race, a conspiracy that Odom believed extended to Congress. Odom thought he saw aliens everywhere. He said they disguised themselves as humans but really looked like giant green frogs with proboscises on the top of their heads. We think of a nose, a great big nose. He got a sticking on the top of his head. As time went on, they started coaxing me to go outside alone. He said, I was scared to death they'd kill me, so I refused. Eventually, they threatened to harm my family, which caused me to give in to them, and I told them I would do whatever they wanted if they just leave my family alone. And they said, go to church. I knew they meant to go to this altar church, so I agreed that I would go. He says, at the altar church, Odom smelled something like a reptile and vinegar. He wrote in his manifesto, I realized that whoever I was dealing with was extraterrestrial, so I became very scared. According to the manifesto, Odom then checked himself into local Veterans Affairs hospitals. And after leaving the hospital, Odom returned to the church, where he eventually found himself face to face with Pastor Remington. He says, we were in mid-conversation when he suddenly revealed himself to me. I have no clue how he did it, but it looked as if his human face became his real face. His eyes were huge and bulging. The eyelids were darker green, and the irises were yellow-brown with slit pupils. After trying to kill himself twice, Odom felt his only option was to go after the aliens. He said, my life was ruined by an intelligent species of amphibian humanoids from Mars. The manifesto doesn't tell us why exactly, why he went after the pastor, only that the pastor was supposedly an alien or their puppet. But the manifesto helps explain why Odom traveled to Washington. It says he went there to deliver a message to the president. Part of the letter addressed to the president says, I want to thank you for your sacrifice to this country. But then he suggests that the president is controlled by aliens. They brag to me about what they do to you. I hope you stop letting them humiliate you. It's time someone took a stand to end this nonsense. Can you think of a better legacy than that? The manifesto also includes a list of noteworthy Martians. On the list are 50 members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, as well as roughly 36 members of the Israeli leadership, including every single prime minister since 1948. This is the stuff of the occult. And the occult is not something you play with. Over 90% of the Christian colleges and seminaries in America are introducing contemplative spirituality, a belief system that incorporates meditation into the lives of their students. One man by the name of Richard Foster, who is an advocate for contemplative spirituality, told his contemplative followers that they needed to say a prayer of protection before they practiced contemplative prayer. Now, why would you have to do that? Only if you were entering areas you didn't belong. Meditation like this leads a person to believe that God is in everything and that all is connected together. Thomas Merton, who was a contemplative of another generation, likens a contemplative meditation experience to an LSD trip. Odom's manifesto expressed many experiences that sounded that way, LSD, but it wasn't LSD, it was meditation, the very thing that many Christian leaders are either now promoting or remaining silent about. There is more in this world than you know, and not everything that goes bump in the night is Santa Claus. Be careful.